Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Coming down in 3, 2, and 1. And welcome to Wausau, Attorney General Josh Kaul. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Well, number one, some breaking news today, actually. We saw that the state of Wisconsin is involved in a new lawsuit filing in support of Minnesota against the Trump administration. Anything you can share with our listeners about that?
Yeah, well, the state of Minnesota has challenged what's going on with ICE and other Department of Homeland Security agents who are there and some of the alleged abuses that have been taking place. We filed a brief with a number of other states supporting the position that Minnesota has taken. I'm very concerned with what we're seeing going on in Minneapolis and the nearby area. It's pretty clear, I think, that community is being targeted by the administration in a way that is inconsistent with our values and in a way that's inconsistent with our Constitution. I don't want to see something like that happen in any community in Wisconsin. And I think the sooner that we're able to put a stop to this in the Minneapolis area, hopefully the less likely it'll be that we'll see something like this again.
Isabella?
And I have a specific question about, something that's in the brief.
There's a line. Oh, sorry. Should I mute my mic?
Sorry. There's a specific line in the brief that I wanted to ask you a quick question about. It's about, kind of the distinction between, what the administration is doing. And it says, to be clear, the amici do not contend that the defendant's conduct infringes on state sovereignty because it reflects an increase in purported immigration enforcement. Defendant's conduct infringes on state sovereignty because, as set forth above and in the plaintiff's motion, defendant's actions have the purpose and effect of inflicting maximal harm on state, city, and community institutions. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means and why that distinction is important?
Absolutely. So the federal government has responsibility for enforcing our immigration laws. And the federal government, under both the current administration and previous administrations, has enforced those laws. And that is their responsibility. There's different policies that different administrations have, and that's how our system works. But what's going on in Minneapolis is fundamentally not about immigration enforcement. It is about causing terror within an American city, causing terror among people. And, even this recent letter from AG Pam Bondi, where one of the things she cited as a reason that would cause a withdrawal of some of these agents was to release the voter rolls, shows that this is not fundamentally about addressing immigration issues. This is about putting people into fear. It's about trying to punish this community and punish the state. And that is where we get into state sovereignty. We have a system set up where we've got state governments and federal governments. It's one of the ways that the founders of this country wanted to protect liberty. And it's been really effective. And you can see how it protects liberty as things are playing out right now in Minneapolis. Having states be independent entities that are able to stand up for themselves and to disagree with the federal government has been important to our system for centuries. And that's what we're concerned about here. And that's why we've framed it that way.
It has been just over a year since the beginning of the second Trump administration. And generally, being somebody that works in justice, and I often think about Lady Justice and the importance of justice as part of the foundations of our system. There have been, I think, examples where there have been cracks that have been shown. And I think one of which is this idea that perhaps you can buy justice for a pardon, X number of dollars. In other areas, how difficult is your job as the top law enforcement official in the state of Wisconsin, not only to do the job of working with the laws, but also with the people? And I think one of the things that we try to talk about here is that our system is so vitally important. 250 years of this system. Has it been more difficult in order to have that trust with the people that you're serving here in Wisconsin because of all the outside noise and issues that are currently in the headlines?
That's certainly a concern I have. And it's happening in a few different ways. One is there is a real concern about accountability. The Supreme Court, I think, mistakenly ruled that there's wide presidential immunity for certain official acts. And that has led to, I think, a sense of impunity with the Trump administration. You also have the president issuing pardons of people who in some cases were convicted of really serious offenses. And there's a feeling that, if you're Elon Musk, you may have more access to the levers of government than some of the rest of us do. not necessarily because you're somebody who's got better ideas, but because you've got the connections that help you do that. And we obviously saw a lot of concerning stuff coming out of Doge. What I think is important for people to know is that this is a system that has served this country incredibly well for a long time. If we don't have a system where we're governed by the rule of law, that means we have people who can make arbitrary decisions that govern what happens in our lives. That's not a way that I think anybody who lives in a democracy wants to see the country moving, but it's been a theme of the current Trump administration, and it's really concerning. So I think it's important that we push back on these arbitrary and often unlawful actions we've seen from the administration. And that's what we've been doing over the course of the last year plus now. My administration has joined more than 40 different multi-state suits challenging different Trump administration actions. We have gotten orders blocking a lot of those actions. There have been some cases where the administration has backed down. I would love to tell you we keep having all this success because we're the greatest lawyers ever. But the reality is the relief we're getting in some of these cases is considered extraordinary. But courts are granting it because what the Trump administration is doing is extraordinary. They are violating the law. They're flouting it in a lot of cases. That's why we've been able to step in and been a real buffer against a lot of the chaos that we've seen from this administration.
And I know Isabella has a follow-up based on those cases.
Yeah, you mentioned, over 40 lawsuits, that's a lot of them. What are some of the issues that, the state is helping, maybe even other states, push back on? What should people know about the lawsuits that Wisconsin is involved in?
Yeah, unfortunately, the lawlessness we've seen from the Trump administration is pretty widespread. So the issues have run the gamut. A lot of them relate to efforts by the federal government to cut funding unlawfully. So Congress has passed a bill. It was signed into law by a president. And now the Trump administration has come in and said, we don't care that that's the law. We're not going to fund this, even though they're obligated to do so. So over the summer, for example, we saw an effort to freeze a bunch of sources of funding for schools. The impact in the Wausau area alone would have been nearly $500,000 over the course of a year. And if you think schools are sitting around with hundreds of thousands of excess dollars that they can all of a sudden reallocate in their budget, you don't know how schools work. Mm-hmm. This would have had tens of millions of dollars of impact across Wisconsin and even bigger impact nationwide. So we filed suit. There were also some Republican senators who pushed back, and ultimately the administration backed down and it agreed to release those funds. But that's one example of where they've stepped in the way of funding that was critical. They tried to dismantle the AmeriCorps program. It's another example of how they have disregarded the law and tried to cut things. They've also added unconstitutional or unlawful conditions to different grants. So one of the things we've fought in a number of cases are their attempt to require state and local law enforcement to cooperate with their immigration enforcement efforts. If we hadn't fought that, imagine if Minnesota hadn't fought that. They could be saying, you've agreed to be part of what we're doing in Minneapolis. Fortunately, we've been successful in challenging those things. There's also been a real threat to data privacy as the administration has tried to gather information about SNAP applicants and recipients, for example, or people who are on healthcare programs that are government administered, or to get our voter data. So in a lot of areas, we've been involved in challenges. The good news is we're having a lot of success. The bad news is there are a lot of fronts we need to be pushing back on.
And that's actually a point I wanted to ask you about, because this weekend, the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, sent a note to the folks in Minnesota saying, well, we could bring out the ICE troops and leave if you give us your voter information rolls. Could you explain what is the law there? Because I could actually, in a sense, if you really put your imagination to use, say, well, maybe there is some lawful reason that the federal government would want to have some of that information, but at the same time, it just feels so overbearing in this case, where we just want all this information to be able to use it to our own devices. Could you maybe delve a little deeper into what that request that the Trump administration has made, I think not just to Minnesota, but all over the country, what it means in terms of the law, and also what it means in terms of the privacy of the people of the state of Wisconsin?
Yeah, there are a number of states now, including Wisconsin, where the Trump administration has asked for voter data from the states. And our election commission voted not to provide that data. And they were clear why they were doing that. You can actually, anybody can go online and buy the voter file. There's information that can be purchased. It does not include people's sensitive private information, like their social security number, for example. That information, the election commission made clear they are prohibited under state law from disclosing. So they said, we're not going to violate state law and give this to you. We all share an interest in ensuring that the voter files are accurate, that people who are registered are those who should be registered. But we know in Wisconsin that our system works really well, and we know it because our elections are so close and they are challenged over and over again. We had, a statewide recount in 2016. We had a recount of certain counties in 2020, and our system has consistently shown to be effective. That the results reflect the will of the voters, and you can even just tell that from the results. We have, 5 of our last 7 presidential elections were decided by less than 1 percentage point in Wisconsin, and they've gone both ways. So the system is fair. This is the Trump administration trying to pursue this conspiracy theory about the 2020 elections that refuses to go away. But it's part of a broader effort to gather up all this data, which is really concerning to those who care about privacy and civil liberties. It's one of the reasons we're fighting back here.
And I also want to ask, the data issue is such a huge issue for locals, on the personal level. What are some of the other things that, are impacting daily Wisconsinites when it comes to these lawsuits?
Yeah, I think the funding cuts are really significant because there are a lot of sources of funding that we just have come to rely on. I mentioned the education example before, or AmeriCorps, but there's also funding that goes to medical research, for instance, where they've tried to significantly reduce the funds that are available. There's other stuff that helps keep communities safe, like disaster mitigation efforts. They tried to cut funding in that area as well. So that's another example of an area. Additionally, one of the cases we have relates to a provision of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which we refer to as the defund provision, where Planned Parenthoods are given this difficult choice. And the idea behind the bill was to try to force Planned Parenthoods to choose between providing general reproductive health care services or to provide access to safe and legal abortion. That for a period of time that caused Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin to shut down its abortion services. And we have a challenge arguing that Planned Parenthood is being targeted because of its political speech. We talked before about A.G. Bondi and threatening the state of Minnesota. You are not supposed to use the levers of government to target people because they're doing something lawful. That is not what you're supposed to do. That is how you infringe on people's rights. So we think we have a strong argument that what they did in that bill is improper. But that case will play out, as we move forward.
Talking again about justice in the general terms, you talked about, again, all these court cases going on, and we've seen so many battles, I think, between federal officials and state officials around the country. Do you think the system is working right now? Do you think, because you're dealing with it on a daily basis, probably waking up at night, getting texts about something else that's going on, are you comfortable that the court systems within our country and all over, is the system working? Can Americans and Wisconsinites feel as though that the system is holding during this very difficult time?
I feel good about how the court system has reacted so far during this administration. There are, I have a few points that are really important to make. One is Donald Trump is really outstanding at commanding attention. We all see it all the time. We see him all the time, and when he makes some pronouncement, it's front page news. It's on the media. They're taking this action. They're taking that action. What you don't often see on the front page of the paper is court has blocked Trump administration effort to do this thing. And so I think that to some extent, a lot of what the administration has done has actually been successfully blocked through some of these actions. But I think that just doesn't get the same kind of attention that the action does in the first place. So that, when they talk about dismantling AmeriCorps, that gets a lot of attention. The court order that helps restore AmeriCorps maybe gets less so. Mm-hmm. So I do think there's maybe more going on than is always front and center in the news. The other thing is, like I said, the courts have been engaged in a lot of these cases. We're, like I said, we've joined over 40 multi-state suits. In a majority of those cases, we've gotten some sort of positive result, either through a court order or because the administration has backed down. Others are still pending, and we're waiting to see. A lot of them are still working their way through the early phases of the cases, but in a lot of those, we've gotten these emergency orders early on. So the lower courts have been very good at holding the administration to account and protecting the Constitution. The U.S. Supreme Court, I think, remains to be seen. I think their decision granting this broad immunity is part of the reason we're facing some of the challenges we are today. There was an opinion that allowed for these so-called Kavanaugh stops. That's of significant concern, and the Supreme Court has now tried to, at least Justice Kavanaugh has tried to walk that back a bit. But I think that's a concerning development. And then the Supreme Court has been very supportive of what the administration has done, or at least permissive, when it comes to executive power and allowing the president to have a lot of control over the executive branch, whether that's firing employees or trying to significantly reduce agencies. But I also think we're going to see some significant cases pushing back. I mean, the tariff case looks like they're inclined to rule against the president. This effort to fire a Federal Reserve Board member seems to have gotten a lot of pushback. I think the birthright citizenship case, where our Constitution literally provides for this, and it has been understood as a constitutional protection for over 100 years. I feel really optimistic that the Supreme Court will ultimately stand by birthright citizenship. So the court system has, I think, overall been very effective. Congress, on the other hand, has not really been very effective as a check on the president. And so that's how our system was set up, checks and balances. We've got the executive doing what the administration is doing. It would be great to have Congress that was doing something, but the courts have been important, and the states, often in conjunction with the courts, have been important. So there are parts of the system that have been quite effective. There are other parts that leave a lot more work to be done.
You've mentioned a few of these successes already. Could you kind of give an overview of some of the successes you have seen in all of these cases, as you've kind of gone through the process?
Yeah, in a lot of these cases, the administration has tried to do something very abruptly, often without notice. I mentioned the education funding before. That happened very abruptly. And so schools that had been expecting to get these streams of funding as part of their budget all of a sudden had to scramble in response to these changes. When there have been actions that happen very abruptly, we have often gone to court and asked for what's called preliminary relief, where we say to the court, this case will play out over a period of time. The justice system is sometimes quite slow, but we need an emergency order or a temporary order that blocks the administration from taking this action. So they need to be blocked from putting this grant condition as part of a grant, for example, or their effort to freeze this source of funding should be blocked. So we will often ask for that from the courts. In some of the cases, we've gotten orders like that have stopped the administration. In some cases, the administration has preemptively backed down, like I mentioned in the education context. There have been a variety of ways that those things have unfolded. But in a lot of these cases, we've had success. In others, the process will play out over a longer period of time because the need isn't as urgent. So the president, for example, has said he's going to make changes relating to election oversight, for instance. That's another case. Some of these things may play out over different periods of time, but we've tried to use the tools available not only to get relief, but to get relief when it's needed to make an impact.
Before we went on the air, I asked you about why you were here in Wausau, and you were visiting some folks from the DOJ that work in this area. Could you maybe explain? Because I think a lot of people think, hey, DOJ down in Madison. How is the DOJ reach into the Wausau area?
Well, part of what we do at the Department of Justice is we've got our Division of Criminal Investigation, and their responsibility is to investigate crimes of statewide importance. And that includes investigating homicides, sexual assaults, arsons, fraud, internet crimes against children, some really, really serious offenses. They often work in combination with local law enforcement as part of efforts to investigate cases. And we have several DCI offices in the state, including one right here in the Wausau area. So I had a chance to check in with some of the folks who work there today. They do incredibly important work to keep communities across the state safe. And we're really fortunate as a state to have a division like our Division of Criminal Investigation that both has a ton of expertise and can conduct significant investigations themselves, but also that works with partners in law enforcement and supports law enforcement agencies across the state.
And Isabella, do you have a final question for the Attorney General?
Sure. So these legal cases, they can get really complicated for the average person to try to decipher. What are some recommendations you have for locals who want to understand more about these cases that Wisconsin's involved in?
We try to talk at the Department of Justice about what's happening in these cases, and we try to highlight when there's an order that changes fundamentally what's going on. So what I think is really important about some of these cases, because there are lots of developments in these cases and there's a lot of procedure that goes into them, But sometimes you will see orders that say this policy is blocked. They'll say enjoined in the court decisions. That's when there's real significance in the case. Part of our job at the department is to inform the public about what's happening in these cases. So we try to do that. And, hearing from people as we communicate about the work we're doing around the state is also a way that folks can learn more. But we have a website. We release this information at the Wisconsin Department of Justice, and we encourage folks to learn more.
Fantastic. Again, really happy that you were able to stop by on your travels here to North Central Wisconsin. I know it's been a very busy time for you, but again, really appreciate giving some of your insights into what's happening with the state DOJ. And as you pass through again, what I'm sure is going to be a busy 2026, would love to talk again.
Great. Thanks for having me again.
That is the Attorney General for the state of Wisconsin, Josh Kaul. We will take a quick break and then come back. Hey, we got a real special guest coming up after our bottom of the hour news update. Candidate for the state treasurer, Yi Leng Zhang. He'll be joining us here in studio coming up after our information update, news, weather, and sports. Coming up next, Chad Holmes Show, 98.9 WXCO.
And we're clear.
Thank you, Ian.
You're welcome.